Snow drifted across the valley the way dust settles over abandoned dreams, quietly, relentlessly, until every shape blurred into a single cold emptiness. The last wagon had passed an hour ago, its wheel tracks already smoothed into white by the wind. On the edge of the frozen trail stood a tiny, stage stop that barely qualified as a building. One warped bench, a peeling sign, and a single lantern hanging crooked from the post. Its flame guttered in the wind, the only living thing for miles. Eleanor Ward pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, though the wool had long lost the warmth it once promised. The hem was frayed, her boots were cracked, and her hands shook so violently she tucked them beneath her arms to hide it. Her carpetbag sat beside her boots, a thin, pitiful thing holding everything she owned. She kept her chin high even though her lips trembled. The driver who dropped her here hadn't bothered to look back. He'd taken her last coins, tipped his hat with a grin too wide to be kind, and muttered something about hoping her luck changed. Then he'd vanished, down the ridge road, leaving her in a cold so sharp it bit bone. She had believed the letter, a position as caretaker and tutor for a ranch family in the northern range. Room and board, a fair wage, a chance to start again far from the humiliation she'd fled back east. She'd traveled for 13 days, trusting that promise like a fool trusts the sun to rise even on the darkest nights. But when she reached the ranch listed in the letter, the house stood abandoned, shutters fallen, chimney collapsed, boards scattered by weather. No family, no employer, nothing but a lie in ink. She had knocked anyway, as if ghosts might answer. Now she stood alone in the brutal wind, miles from any real town, the day bleeding into dusk without mercy. She could stay here and freeze, or she could walk into the unknown with a strength she didn't believe she still possessed. Neither option felt survivable. Her breath rose in pale clouds. She tried whispering a prayer, but the words stuck like thawing ice in her throat. She didn't trust prayers anymore. They hadn't saved her when Mr. Alden spread his rumors, when his father fired her, when the whole town turned their backs. They hadn't saved her from hunger or shame or the treacherous road that had led her to this empty stop. A gust of wind struck so hard she stumbled. She put a hand on the bench to steady herself. The lantern flickered wildly, throwing her shadow across the snow as if even the darkness wanted to leave her. A distant jingle broke the silence. She lifted her head. Hoofbeats, slow, heavy, steady, as if the rider wasn't rushing anywhere but wasn't lost either. Eleanor's heartbeat tripped unevenly. She stepped back from the road, every muscle in her tensing. A wagon rounded the bend, lanterns swinging from its sides. The horse pulling it moved with the sure stride of an animal used to hardship. The driver sat tall, reins in one hand, a fur-lined coat wrapped over broad shoulders. He saw her. The wagon slowed. The man's jaw tightened, as if he wished he hadn't noticed. He guided the horse to a stop a few paces away and stood, snow collecting on the brim of his hat. He looked like a man carved from mountain stone. Somber eyes, dark hair, stubble that spoke of long days without rest. "You stranded?" he asked. His voice didn't carry softness, more like resignation. Like he already knew he wouldn't be leaving her here. Eleanor nodded once. "The driver left me here. I thought someone was coming for me, but I was wrong." He studied her carefully, not with suspicion exactly, but with the wary caution of someone who'd learned the cost of being too kind. "Where are you headed?" "I don't know anymore," she said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Not here, not there, just away." He exhaled, breath fogging in the cold. "Name?" "Eleanor Ward." He tipped his hat. "Nathaniel Holt." Silence stretched between them. The wind howled through the pines like a warning. He glanced at the dying lantern above her. "You'll freeze before morning." "I know." He scratched his jaw, clearly working through an inner argument. "I've got a ranch about 4 miles west. Ain't much, but there's a roof. My daughter's there." He paused as if that mattered. "You can ride along, just for the night." Just for the night. Those 4 words echoed through her like a promise she didn't dare accept. But she wasn't foolish. Pride was useless when your toes were turning numb. "I would be grateful," she whispered. Nathaniel stepped down, boots crunching in snow. He lifted her carpetbag. With one hand, it weighed nearly nothing, and helped her climb into the wagon. She settled onto the wooden seat, shivering uncontrollably now that the wind wasn't battering her directly. Nathaniel clicked his tongue, and the horse started forward. Snow swirled in the lantern light as they moved deeper into the valley. For a time neither spoke. The rhythm of the horse's hooves, the creak of the wagon, and the low whistle of wind filled the silence. Eleanor glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were steady, strong. His posture was rigid, like someone accustomed to carrying weight, of work, of responsibility, of grief. Something about him felt heavy, not dangerous, but worn by life in ways she understood intimately. "Your daughter," she murmured. "Is she very young?" "7. Does she live alone with you?" "Yeah." Eleanor opened her mouth to ask another question, but he added quietly, "Her mother passed 2 winters ago." The sorrow in his voice wasn't loud, but it was deep, like the kind of wound that doesn't bleed anymore but never fully closes. Eleanor looked away, focusing on the road ahead. "I'm sorry," she said. Nathaniel simply nodded once, as if accepting condolences was something he had long stopped trying to do. They rode another mile in silence before he spoke again. "How'd you end up out here alone?" Eleanor hesitated, tasting the bitterness of her truth. She didn't owe him the story. She barely knew him. But something about the darkness around them, the way the snow muffled the world, made it feel safe to speak things she hadn't said aloud in months. "I was promised a job," she said. "Teaching, caretaking. But the letter was false. Someone thought it amusing to deceive a woman who had nowhere else to go." Humiliation crept up her neck. She hated how small her voice sounded. Nathaniel didn't pity her. He didn't flinch. He just nodded as though false promises were a currency he recognized. People who write lies don't usually have to live with the consequences, he muttered. People who read them do. Eleanor blinked at him. "You understand more than most." "Life ain't hard to understand," he said softly. "Just hard to survive." For a long time there was nothing but the steady sway of the wagon. The road narrowed, twisting between 2 ridges. Nathaniel lifted the lantern higher to see the path. A storm cloud darkened the horizon, its edges flickering with distant lightning. "We need to hurry," he murmured. "Weather's turning nasty." The horse quickened its steps. Eleanor's heart beat faster. The cold seeped deeper into her bones. But now there was a thread of hope warming her from the inside. A roof, a fire, a night not spent dying. Lights appeared ahead, dim, flickering, coming from a squat wooden house tucked into the base of a hill. Smoke curled from the chimney. A small barn leaned against the wind a few yards away. The moment the wagon rolled to a stop, the front door creaked open. A little girl wearing wool socks and an oversized sweater padded onto the porch, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hair was a storm of curls, and her face brightened instantly when she saw her father. "Papa!" Nathaniel stepped down quickly. "Back inside, Rose, it's too cold." But Rose ignored him, bounding toward the wagon until she saw Eleanor sitting there. She froze. Her eyes, wide, dark, curious, studied Eleanor with the kind of honesty only a child possessed. "Papa, who's she?" Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Miss Ward needed help. She'll stay tonight." Rose blinked, then her small hand lifted in a shy wave. "Hello?" Eleanor smiled, though her lips trembled. "Hello, sweetheart?" Nathaniel helped her down from the wagon. She nearly stumbled. Her legs were numb. Nathaniel steadied her by the elbow, his touch firm but careful, like he was afraid she might shatter if he used too much force. They entered the house. Warmth hit her like a blessing. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, throwing amber light across the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of pine, smoke, and something sweet. Maybe the remnants of supper. The home was small but tidy, with quilts draped over chairs and shelves lined with books and jars. Rose hovered behind her father, half hiding, half observing. Eleanor set her bag gently on the floor. The warmth made her dizzy. She hadn't realized how close her body was to giving up. Nathaniel hung his coat, then gestured toward the hearth. "Warm up, I'll get you a blanket." Rose tugged on Eleanor's skirt softly. "Are you a teacher?" Eleanor blinked. "I was." Rose nodded as if this confirmed a suspicion. "I like books. Papa reads to me every night, but sometimes he gets sleepy before the story ends." Nathaniel groaned. "Rose, "It's true," she insisted. Eleanor smiled, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "Then maybe I will read to you tonight." Rose's face lit up like a lantern in spring. Nathaniel froze mid-step, the blanket in his hands. He stared at Eleanor, really stared, as if she'd said something he hadn't heard in a long time, something he had once hoped for, but had buried so deep it no longer felt real. Eleanor felt heat rush to her face. She didn't mean anything by it. It was just a kindness, just for tonight. But the way Nathaniel looked away, jaw tightening, told her the gesture had touched a part of him he wasn't ready to open. He handed her the blanket. "Thank you," he said, voice quieter now, "for offering." She settled near the fire, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders while Rose brought a book with dog-eared pages. Nathaniel moved around the kitchen, pouring hot water into a cup, adding a spoonful of honey. He set the steaming mug beside her. "Drink slow. Your body needs to warm up gradually." His care surprised her. He didn't hover, didn't patronize. He simply existed near her with a quiet solidity that eased something inside her she didn't know needed easing. Rose leaned into Eleanor, listening raptly as she began to read. Her small head rested against Eleanor's arm. The warmth of the child seeped into her heart in a way she wasn't prepared for. Every so often, Eleanor caught Nathaniel watching them from the doorway. Eyes shadowed, conflicted, soft in ways she suspected he didn't allow himself often. When Rose finally fell asleep against her, Nathaniel lifted her gently, cradling her with a tenderness that cracked something deep in Eleanor's chest. "She'll sleep in my room," he murmured. Eleanor nodded. When he returned, he offered a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You can stay in the spare room," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm." Eleanor rose slowly, blanket still around her shoulders. She followed him to the narrow room. A single bed, a small table, a window with linen curtains. Simple, clean, unpretentious. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathaniel stepped back. "Just for tonight," he murmured. But there was hesitation in his voice, a flicker, of something he didn't yet understand. When the door closed, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, fingers trembling against the blanket. The fire crackled faintly through the wall. Snow continued to fall outside, but for the first time in weeks, she felt the ache inside her loosen. She lay back, staring at the ceiling beams. A stranger had given her shelter. A child had gifted her trust. And somewhere beyond the walls, a man who had lost everything moved quietly through the house, trying to keep his life from unraveling again. Eleanor whispered to the darkness, "Maybe tomorrow will hurt less." But she didn't believe it. Not yet. She only knew she would survive tonight. And that, after everything, was something. Snow thawed slowly into mud, then froze again into a crust of glass that made every step a careful negotiation. Days bled the same way they always do on the frontier. Small chores stitched together into the fabric of a life that could not be rushed. Eleanor found herself waking before the lanterns were lit, hands already moving through tasks that felt less like labor and more like ritual. She swept the hearth before the coals died, set out bowls for oatmeal, and pulled drawers closed with a gentleness that belonged to someone who'd learned to treat small things as sacred. Rose woke at the smell of bacon, hair in tangles and eyes still heavy with sleep. The child had a dozen small habits. Eleanor discovered and loved in the first week how she tied her shoes with one clumsy loop, the way she tucked her thumb into her mouth when she was thinking, how she scolded her father when he mended a fence without showing her first. Rose's questions came like pebbles dropped into still water. Each one set up a rippling arc that made Eleanor smile without trying. Nathaniel moved through the mornings with the economy of a man who measured the day by tasks. He fed the stock, repaired the sagging fence, and loaded wood with a rhythm that belonged to the land. At times his shoulders seemed to carry the winter light itself, heavy, gray, unrelenting. But when he looked toward the house, there was a softness he did not show to anyone else. Eleanor saw it in the way his shoulders loosened when Rose clung to his hand, the way he watched them by the hearth, trying to memorize a normalness he feared would slip away. "Read to me again," Rose asked one morning, mouth full of biscuit, crumbs dusting her lap like falling snow. Eleanor took the book and read with the sort of steadied voice that belonged to someone who had been taught to find refuge in stories. She watched Rose's eyelids droop as each line folded into the next. The child's head rested against her arm, breath even. Outside the land was a hard palette of brown and white. Inside, their corner of the world kept warm. Days accumulated into a sort of confidence. Nathaniel taught Rose to split kindling without embarrassing himself, and Eleanor taught the child her letters. How an A could be a mountain, an M two small humps, a W a line of waves. Rose practiced on scraps of paper, forming clumsy letters that made Eleanor clap with a pride that warmed like summer sunlight. When neighbors came by, rare, careful men and women who brought jars or gossip, their eyes lingered on Eleanor in ways she hadn't seen since she'd fled the town where her life had been upended. There were questions everyone asked, polite in tone but sharp at the edges. Where'd she come from? Is she married? How long will she stay? The voices were always softer at first, then edged with the judgment that frontier towns kept like a brittle shell. Nathaniel fielded them with a steadiness that protected the house like a fence post. He'd introduce Eleanor simply. Miss Ward's staying. She's teaching Rose. And the conversation would either wither or turn to weather and cattle. Not everyone left unchanged. Some stepped away with suspicious glances, their opinions already forming like frost on a window. Eleanor tried not to let the looks cut into her. She had been cut plenty before. By love, by slander, by the cruelty of men who thought it their right to rewrite a woman's truth. But the small kindnesses, Rose's laughter at a clumsy letter, Nathaniel's hand steadying a pan, the way the smoke threaded through the rafters in the evening, built a tiny harbor inside her chest. She would not let the town's whispers pull her under. Winter grew teeth. A deep storm came in one night with wind like a whip and snow that rose in waves against the barn. They pitched in together, coal-stoked fires, salted meat, bread pressed heavy and nourishing. The storm trapped them, and so the world narrowed to the three of them. Their breaths, their meals, the soft scrape of a needle through cloth. It was in the flicker of one of those long nights that Nathaniel opened the hope chest. He'd kept it closed since the house had first fallen to silence, but he'd been carrying a weight that made him restless. The lid creaked when he lifted it, and moonlight found a half-finished quilt folded. Inside, stitched squares of yellow, daisies and faded calico, a pattern he'd watched Margaret begin before the fever took her. He sat on the floor with the chest between his knees, fingers tracing the edge where Margaret's needle had paused. Eleanor came to the doorway carrying 2 tin cups of cocoa. She watched him for a long moment, the room warm around her like a borrowed mercy. She was making that for a baby, Nathaniel said finally, voice as brittle as old wood. We never had the chance. Eleanor set the cups down and sat opposite him. She didn't ask what hurt the most. The loss, the memory, or the habit of ignoring the world so completely that grief could lodge like an icicle. She chose daisies, he went on, said they were brave flowers, pushed through the hard dirt and still smiled. I kept that chest closed because opening it felt like tearing the last page out of her book. But I can't stand it any longer. Eleanor listened, hands folded around the cup as if to keep the warmth inside. She thought of the letter that had brought her here, the lie that nearly froze her, and of how truth had a way of finding people even when they meant to hide. She would have liked you, she murmured. She would have liked Rose having the finished quilt. He gave a small, incredulous laugh that was not funny. You say that now. But I don't know what would have happened if she'd lived. You'll never know if you keep the chest shut, Eleanor said. Let the stitches tell a story. Let the work be for the child instead of the sorrow. He looked at her then, properly, eyes raw, a man recalculating the shape of his life. Would you consider finishing it? Eleanor's fingers brushed the patchwork. The thread was faded but not hopeless. I will. The words felt both like a promise and a gentle command to herself. If you'll show me the pattern Margaret started. They worked together over the weeks that followed. Nathaniel held fabric, fetched needles, told stories of Margaret between each stitch. How she laughed at storms. How she'd worn a yellow dress for no reason but because it made her feel brave. Sometimes Rose sat with them and clumsily tried to add her own stitches, little knots of color that made them all laugh at her earnestness. Neighbors who watched saw a slow change. Where gossip had once gathered like crows, it now faltered when people saw the three at the window, faces warm with light. There were still furrowed brows and whispers, but more often there were nods, hesitant, the way frost loosens when the first sun touches it. One Sunday, Nathaniel insisted they go to service. He had not set foot in the church since Margaret's funeral. The building had been a mausoleum for years in his mind. But Rose tugged at his sleeve, pleading for the story of the pastor's sermons and the way the choir sang. Eleanor agreed, a small private understanding passing between them. It would be a test of the world beyond their walls. They dressed in the best they had. Eleanor wore the one good dress she owned, patched but clean, its collar starched with care. Nathaniel scrubbed his face until the stubble softened into a memory of neatness. Rose beamed, hair tied with a scrap of blue ribbon Eleanor had found. The church smelled of pine and wax. People took their pews like they had for years, some with reverence, some with the practiced gravity of routine. Eleanor felt the eyes as soon as they entered. They were not malicious so much as measuring, the way people use their gaze to determine what they will allow themselves to accept. Mrs. Harrows, who had once brought Nathaniel a jar of cider and a long stare, sat near the front, her hands wrinkled like dried leaves folded in her lap. She watched them approach, with the strictness of someone who kept an account of decency in her head and expected others to keep theirs. They found a pew near the back and knelt, heads bowed. The sermon began, the pastor speaking about mercy and the strange grace God gives to those who still turn toward the light after they have been cast into dark places. Eleanor listened, fingers pressed to the edge of the pew, thinking of all the dark places she'd walked through and the small, ridiculous lights that had kept her moving. When the service ended and the congregation rose, whispers fell into the aisle like a scattering of seeds. People stepped around them in ways that suggested caution. Eleanor could feel the weight of society's ledger, balancing quietly, notes being made. On the steps outside, Mrs. Harrows intercepted them. Her voice was soft but edged like a seam ripper. "Nathaniel Holt," she said as if pronouncing a trial, "we thought you might find company in time. But you must be careful. The town remembers things." Nathaniel held himself still. Eleanor felt Rose reach for his hand and squeeze. "What would you have me do?" he asked quietly. "Keep your house the way it was," Mrs. Harrows said. "Keep memory clear. For Rose's sake, people will talk. You must be above giving them reason." Eleanor certainly heard the implied accusation that a woman in his house was a hazard to his daughter's virtue, that comfort given to a stranger could become something else entirely. In the eyes of the town, the words cut, not because they were new, but because they were the same old knife that had once carved Eleanor's life into rumor and shame. She felt the old tiny animal inside her, hunkering to run at the first sign of danger. She could leave. She could gather her scant belongings, lift the latch, and walk back into the vast white where no one could accuse her, because no one would care enough to notice. Nathaniel's jaw worked. He could have let the sentence lie. He could have offered the polite defense, the edge of cold civility that said he would not be bowed by gossip. Instead, he pulled Rose close and looked at Eleanor in a way that dislodged something. "People will talk," he said, voice a low iron. "They will think things I don't want them to, but I'll answer for my house with the truth. She came to my door in the snow. She warmed our child. If that's a crime, then I prefer conviction." Mrs. Harrows's mouth thinned. She lifted her chin with a dignity meant to contain her disapproval. "Then be careful," she said and turned away. They walked home in a silence that thrummed with the noise of judgments not yet spoken aloud. Rose hummed a small song to herself, hopeful and untroubled. Eleanor watched Nathaniel, his shoulders taut, eyes distant, and felt a prickle of guilt. That night she sat up sewing by the lamplight while Nathaniel repaired a harness. The house settled around them, old wood creaking as if remembering better days. She thought of leaving, of how easy it would be to slide out like smoke through a vent. She thought of Rose's small, trusting smile, and Nathaniel's hand gentle on the child's shoulder. She thought of the quilt, of daisies stitched between grief and hope. Her hand paused on the needle. She imagined Rose as a young woman one day, wrapped in the handiwork they were making now, threads of loss transformed into warmth. Eleanor felt something tighten then uncoil in her chest. She laid down the needle and walked to the window. Outside, the lamp at the road burned steady, a small stubborn point of light in the dark. It reminded her of a platform where she'd once sat, alone, waiting for salvation that never came. Now a different lantern burned, one set in a window, given by a child who had no idea what it meant to keep such things lit. It was ordinary, domestic, a sign that someone would come home. Eleanor pressed her palm to the cold glass and, without thinking, whispered to the night, "I will not leave yet." It was not a promise to Nathaniel or to Rose. It was a promise to herself, to see if this strange thing, household, and hearth and the slow threading of lives, could build something true from broken pieces. Beyond the window, the snow lay in a washed sheet, and unnoticed by anyone but the three who lived in the warm glow inside. Something like hope had settled like powder on their sill. The thaw came slowly, the way forgiveness sometimes does, hesitant, unsure, melting one stubborn edge at a time. Winter loosened its grip on the valley, letting thin threads of sunlight spill across the fields. The creek near the barn groaned with shifting ice, cracking open in places like a wound, deciding it was time to heal. Eleanor felt the change long before the snow truly receded. The mornings were less brutal, the nights less sharp. Nathaniel no longer rose with a soldier's urgency. His movements softened, as if the cold inside him was warming too. Rose woke earlier, eager to stomp through the patches of mud and slush as if they were new, worlds being born. And slowly, quietly, Eleanor became part of the rhythm of the house. She hung laundry beside Nathaniel without needing to be asked. She helped split logs, though he always took the heavier pieces before she could reach for them. She taught Rose to read sentences instead of letters, watching pride bloom across the child's face each time. She finished a page without stumbling. Nathaniel built her a small shelf beside the hearth without saying a word about it. When she found it one morning, sanded smooth and waiting to hold her books, she touched the wood gently, feeling how deeply the gesture reached. She didn't mention it aloud, neither did he, but they both understood the meaning nestled between grain and nail. Still, something delicate lingered between them, something neither dared name. It was like a stray thread pulled from the quilt, loose, waiting, dangerous to tug too hard. One late afternoon, Eleanor was gathering eggs from the coop when she heard the sharp crack of wood from behind the barn. She set the basket down and hurried toward the sound. Nathaniel stood over a broken post, axe in hand, sweat on his brow despite the lingering chill. His jaw was clenched tight. A letter lay trampled in the mud nearby. Eleanor's breath hitched. "What happened?" He wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his shirt. "Town council. They're debating something. Something about Rose. About me." He retrieved the letter and held it out with fingers trembling, just enough to betray him. Eleanor read it. The words felt like claws. The council had been approached by 2 town elders, Mrs. Harrows among them, expressing concern that Rose was being raised in an improper household. They cited Eleanor's presence as unmonitored influence, questioning whether Nathaniel could provide a stable moral environment. Her vision blurred. "They're using me to punish you." Nathaniel took the letter back, crumpling it loosely. "They're using their fear. They're afraid of change. Afraid of anything that doesn't fit their narrow lines." He swung the axe with a force that made the ground tremble. Eleanor stepped back, heart pounding. She wanted to stay calm, to be the quiet center she had learned to be during her hardest days. But shame flared through her like wildfire. Shame for something she had not done. Shame for being a stranger in someone else's life. "I should go," she whispered, "before they tear your family apart." His head snapped toward her. "Don't say that." "It's true," she cried, voice cracking. "Your neighbors don't trust me. They don't know me. They'll never let this house be at peace while I'm in it." Nathaniel dropped the axe with a heavy thud. Mud splashed up against his boots. "You think leaving will stop their judgment? Eleanor, the minute you walk out that door, they'll think they were right about you and I—" He broke off, jaw tightening as if he'd revealed too much. She swallowed. "And you what?" Nathaniel turned away, bracing his hands against the fence. as if the wood was the only thing keeping him upright. "I can't watch you leave," he admitted quietly. "Not after everything. Not after the warmth you've brought to this place." He looked over his shoulder. "Look at Rose. Look at me. We were ghosts when you came. Now the house breathes again." Her breath trembled. "But your reputation—" "Hang my reputation," he growled. "I'm done letting the town run my life." A storm, this one warmer but no less fierce, passed between them. Then he softened, voice raw. "Stay. Stay because you want to. Stay because Rose needs you. Because I—" He stopped again. "Because I need you." The words hovered unspoken between them, fragile and dangerous. Eleanor stepped closer, mud sucking lightly at her boots. "Nathaniel," she whispered. But before she could say more, the barn door creaked open. Rose peeked out, cheeks flushed from play. "Papa, Miss Eleanor?" She looked between them, sensing the tension though she couldn't name it. "Are we having supper soon?" Nathaniel inhaled slowly, grounding himself. "Yes, Rosie, we're coming." She nodded happily and darted back inside. The moment broke. Eleanor blinked away the sting in her eyes. Nathaniel bent to pick up the fallen letter. The wind carried the scent of thawing earth between them. They returned to the house in silence, walking side by side but wrapped in separate storms. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in the spare room, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the house, as if the wood itself was whispering its opinion, urging her to stay or urging her to go. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathaniel's expression when he said he couldn't watch her leave. But she also heard the counsel's words, dripping poison into places she had only just begun to heal. She sat up, heart pounding. Maybe she should leave. Maybe she should save them from the ruin people believed she would bring. But Rose? Sweet Rose would break. And Nathaniel? Her pulse quickened. A soft knock stirred the quiet. She froze. The door opened an inch, a sliver of warm lamplight slipping through. Nathaniel stood there in his undershirt and trousers, hair loose from its tie, eyes shadowed, not with desire, but with exhaustion and something deeper, something unguarded. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered back. He stepped inside, only far enough for the lamp to illuminate his face. He held something in his hand, a piece of the quilt. Margaret's quilt? The section where Eleanor had added her own careful stitches, daisies unfurling into new patterns. He set the fabric down on the small table. "I wanted you to see this," he said. "How your stitches fit with hers. Seamless. Like the quilt was waiting for you to finish it." Eleanor swallowed hard. "It's just thread." "No," he said quietly. "It's hope." Their eyes held, long enough for the air to thicken. Nathaniel stepped back, as though afraid he might cross a line he had vowed to safeguard. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night," she whispered. The door closed gently. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face, heart pounding so hard it felt like her ribs would crack. She didn't sleep at all. The next morning the thaw arrived fully. Sunlight touched the land with warmth that shimmered off the fields. Birds returned in cautious flocks, their songs threading through the branches like praise. Eleanor found Rose on the porch, reading one of the books they'd practiced with. Her voice was steady, proud. "Miss Eleanor!" "I finished the whole page, all by myself." Eleanor hugged her, warmth dissolving some of the heaviness lodged inside. Nathaniel joined them a moment later, hair tousled from sleep, eyes soft in the golden light. He looked at Eleanor, not with longing, not with desperation, but with a quiet certainty that made her pulse unsteady. But before he could speak, the sound of hooves cut through the morning air. A rider approached. Dust kicked up behind the horse. A figure in a long coat. The horse pulled up sharply at the fence, and the rider swung down with practiced ease. It was a man Eleanor recognized in an instant. Even from a distance her breath turned to ice. Edward Alden. The man who had lied. The man who had stolen her reputation. The man who had set her wandering in shame. The man who had written the false promises. Her past had found her. Nathaniel sensed the shift in her body before he saw the rider. His brow furrowed. "You know him?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. "Yes." Alden removed his hat, revealing the same cold confidence she remembered. Unchanged. Unrepentant. "Eleanor." he said, voice far too familiar. "I've been looking for you." Nathaniel stepped in front of her before she could respond, and the thaw of the morning seemed to vanish in an instant, replaced by a winter she had prayed she'd never face again. Edward Alden stood at the fence with the same smug confidence. He wore the day he'd unraveled Eleanor's life. His boots were polished, his coat thick and finer than anything seen in this valley. He looked out of place here, too clean, too sure, too untouched by weather and work. Nathaniel stepped slightly in front of Eleanor, not so much blocking her as anchoring her in place. Rose clung to Eleanor's skirt, sensing danger without understanding it. Edward removed his gloves slowly, theatrically. "You've been difficult to find," he said. "Left town without a word. Imagine my surprise." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You wrote my name on a false letter. You sent me across states to an abandoned home." Edward's brow arched, amused. "You didn't actually believe that job existed, did you?" "Eleanor, you've always been naive." Nathaniel's jaw flexed. "State your purpose," he said coldly. "Then leave." Edward's eyes flicked over him, judgmental, dismissive. "This isn't your affair, sir. This is a personal matter between Miss Ward and myself." "It became my affair the moment she walked into my home," Nathaniel replied, voice steady like the creak of an old tree refusing to bend. Edward's smile thinned. "Your home? My God, Eleanor, you've fallen low." Eleanor felt heat crawl up her neck. Not humiliation, anger. A quiet, simmering flame she had suppressed for too long. "What do you want?" she said. Edward stepped closer. "My father regrets the manner in which things were handled." He said it with the tone of someone offering charity. "We're prepared to hire you back as a housemaid. Not a governess, of course. Your reputation." He waved a hand dismissively. "Well, the rumors still stand." Eleanor inhaled sharply. Nathaniel took a step forward. "Rumors you started?" Edward shrugged. "People believe what they want." Nathaniel's hands balled into fists. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, something old tearing free, something new rising. She stepped forward before Nathaniel could explode. "No," she said plainly. "I'm not going back." Edward blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Her voice held a firmness she didn't know she possessed. "You don't get to ruin my life and then call it charity when you offer me scraps." Edward's eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself." "No," she said. "I finally remember myself." Nathaniel exhaled, a sound like someone pulling air after nearly drowning. Edward scoffed. "You can't seriously think you belong here, with these people, in this valley." Eleanor's gaze flicked to Rose, clinging to her side, eyes wide with fear and trust. Then to Nathaniel, who stood ready to fight a man, a town, the entire world if necessary. "I belong where I am wanted," Eleanor said softly. "And where I can do good." Edward's jaw ticked. "Then you leave me no choice." A chill slithered through her. "What do you mean?" He reached into his coat and pulled out another letter. Its official seal glinted red in the sun. "The town council has agreed to review your influence over Mr. Holt and his daughter. If I submit this statement, they'll have grounds to question the safety of this home. For Rose's sake, they may remove her entirely." Nathaniel was on him before the sentence finished. He grabbed Edward by the coat, shoving him back against the fence so hard it rattled. "You threaten my daughter," Nathaniel growled. "And I swear I will—" "Nathaniel!" Eleanor's voice cracked through the air. He froze. Edward looked shaken for the first time, breath hitching, but he recovered quickly. "Touch me again, and the law comes for you too." Nathaniel's grip slackened, but his fury did not. Eleanor stepped between them, heart slamming in her chest. "Please, let me handle this." Nathaniel swallowed hard, nodding once, stepping back. Edward straightened, brushing off his coat. His smirk returned, weak but forming. "Think carefully, Eleanor. Go with me quietly, and the council will lose interest. Stay here, and this man loses his child." Eleanor lowered her head. For a moment, she was back on that cold train platform, alone, powerless, abandoned. But then she felt a small tug at her skirt. Rose, tiny, brave, clutching Eleanor's hand as if she was something unbreakable. Eleanor knelt in front of the girl. "Go inside, Rosie." Rose shook her head fiercely. "No, I stay with you." Nathaniel's breath shook. Eleanor rose. Her hands no longer trembled. She took the letter from Edward's hand. He smirked, thinking he'd won. Eleanor tore it in half, then tore it again, and again, until the pieces fluttered away like dying birds in the wind. Edward's face twisted. "What have you done?" "I've chosen my life," she said. "You foolish, ruined—" "Leave," Nathaniel barked, stepping beside her. "Now." Edward's composure cracked. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It is," Eleanor said firmly. "You don't get to decide my worth anymore." For a moment, just a moment, Edward looked almost afraid. Then he mounted his horse and rode off hard enough to kick dust into the morning air. Silence settled, heavy as snow. Nathaniel exhaled shakily. "Eleanor!" But she was already shaking. Not from fear, from release. He reached for her tentatively, like she was something fragile. She stepped into his arms before he could change his mind. He wrapped her gently, arms strong but careful. She buried her face against his chest, grounding herself in the scent of pine and smoke and safety. Rose pressed herself between them, clinging to their joined hands. Nathaniel rested his chin on Eleanor's hair. "He won't hurt you again." "He almost hurt you both," she whispered. "No," he murmured. "You saved us." She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw the truth all over his face. He wasn't holding her because she was wounded. He was holding her because she belonged. Nathaniel cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Eleanor, I can't ask for more than you want to give. I can't ask you to stay because I need you, but—" She placed her hand over his. "I choose you," she whispered. "Not because I owe you. Because this home, this warmth, this little girl, this life, it's the first thing that has felt true in a long time." Nathaniel's breath trembled. "And I choose you," he said quietly, voice breaking. "If you'll let me." She nodded. Rose squeezed both their hands, her voice small but bright. "Are we a family now?" Eleanor knelt, pulling Rose into her arms. Nathaniel knelt beside them. "Yes," Eleanor said, "if you want us to be." Rose nodded so hard her curls bounced. "I want that more than anything." Nathaniel gathered them both close, one arm around his daughter, one around Eleanor. In that small patch of thawing earth, surrounded by broken snow and rising sunlight, they held each other as if the world outside no longer had the power to break them. Later that evening, Nathaniel pulled out Margaret's quilt. It was finished now, not perfectly but truthfully. Margaret's stitches beside Eleanor's, past beside future, grief beside hope. Eleanor traced the daisies. "She made beautiful choices," she whispered. "So did you," Nathaniel murmured. They wrapped Rose in the quilt, the child giggling as she sank into the warmth. Nathaniel placed the depot wagon lamp, Eleanor's symbol of abandonment, into the front window. He lit it. The flame burned steady, bright, unwavering. A beacon, a promise, a declaration. Here is warmth. Here is safety. Here is home. That night, the three sat by the fire, the quilt draped around them, the lamp casting soft light across their faces. Outside, snow melted in thin threads, giving way to the first green of spring. Inside, a family breathed its first full breath. Nathaniel took Eleanor's hand. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Rose curled against them both, half asleep, trusting the world again. Home wasn't a place. It was the people you'd choose even after the world failed you. Eleanor had finally found hers. And this time, she wasn't leaving. "Bro, that's the full finale. Emotional. Cinematic, slow burn, deep frontier vibe. Everything matching your competitor's style. If you want, 12 image prompts, or full story in one file, or voiceover style rewrite, or 1800s visual prompts. Just say the word."